Hello everyone, welcome to Robinson Crusoe, Adventures on the Cursed Island, the tutorial. The video will walk you through the setup and playing the game, so just pause the video whenever you need and play along. We'll play through a number of mini games to help you learn the rules. So get out your copy of Robinson Crusoe and let's get started. The first thing we want to do is get out the rule book. Now we're not going to go over all of the rules here, but it's a great reference for you to come back to. More importantly, we want to show you some of the pages that are very helpful for understanding the tutorial and understanding the game. You should start with page 2 and 3, where you can understand the game materials. This is very helpful for understanding the tutorial. You should also familiarize yourself with the next page, the setup, the scenario sheets, and the character sheets. Now, after that, it gets fairly complex by diving into all the rules, and those are worth reading if you've got the time, but for this tutorial, we're going to skip those. But on the back of the rule books are icons and symbols you should familiarize yourself with, and if you turn one page in and look at the appendix, there's a game overview, and it describes the things that we're going to discuss in the tutorial. Now, that game overview is also on a round summary card. And the game overview is a little bit more detailed on a couple of areas, but this round summary card is your single most important tool to being able to play the game Robinson Crusoe. So as we work through this tutorial, you ought to have this round summary to the side and read through it as we're talking about the different parts of the game. You can also compare it to the game overview so that you know the things that are slightly different. Okay, so get out the board, place it in the center of the table, and let's get started with the setup. Next, choose your scenario and put the round marker on the first round. Next, choose one of the character sheets and put it in front of you. Now collect your 2 action pawns and put a wound marker to the left of the wound track. Each character will have an invention, so choose the invention card and put it invention side up. As a reminder, this is the invention side of the card. It shows the requirement of what's needed to build this invention. Once it's built, it becomes an item and you flip the card over. At the bottom of both sides of the cards, it tells you the benefits of this item. Next, go through the rest of the invention cards and pull out the 9 default inventions that have the arrows on either side of the name. Now place them in any order on this part of the board. If you don't remember the inventions, you may want to take a few minutes to remind yourself of the benefits of each invention and the requirements. Shuffle the remaining invention cards and place them invention side up next to the board as your invention deck. Now draw the top 5 inventions and place them invention side up next to the default inventions. Most scenarios start on the beach, and in that case you've already found the shovel. So take the black marker piece and place it on the top of the shovel card. Next, place a white marker on space 0 of the morale track. Place black markers at the 0 space of the roof, palisades, and weapons to keep track of the levels. Next, separate and shuffle the adventure cards. The brown ones are the build cards, place them on the build action space. The gray ones are the gather cards, place them on that space. And then the green ones are the explorer adventure cards and place them on that action space. Place the 3 brown dice underneath the build cards, the 3 gray dice underneath the gather cards, and the 3 green dice underneath the explorer cards. Place the adventure tokens to the side where you can access them easily when you need them. Shuffle the beast cards and place them to the side to form a draw deck. Shuffle the mystery cards and place them next to the board to form a draw deck. Tile 8 is a double-sided tile. It has a beach on one side and a volcano on the other. The volcano is used for scenario 4 and the beach is used for the other scenarios. Place it right here on the board. The camp token is a double-sided token. This is the camp side, and that is the shelter side. Place it camp side up on the starting tile. Next, shuffle the remaining tiles and place them in a stack next to the board. These are the starting equipment cards. Shuffle them and draw 2 randomly. Place the 2 starting equipment that you chose next to the board and put 4 white markers on the bottoms of the cards, 2 for each card. These are the number of times that those equipment can be used. Put aside the other starting equipment. These are the discovery tokens. Shuffle them and put them in a stack next to the board. I actually prefer to create several stacks and just draw from them randomly. Take the resources, the action and weather dice, and all the tokens and put them to a side where you can reach them easily. These are the event cards. There are 2 types of event cards. One type has a book icon in the top center, and the other one has an adventure icon in the top center, both for explore, gather, and build included in that. Divide up the cards into 2 stacks, one with all the book icons, and the other one with all the adventure icons. Now shuffle each of the stacks separately. Look at your scenario and determine the number of rounds in the scenario. The Castaway scenario has 12 rounds. Divide that number of rounds by 2 and round up. Draw that many cards from each of the stacks. So in the Castaways, we would have 6 cards from each stack. Shuffle those cards together, so in the Castaway scenario, that's 12 cards, and place them face down in the event space on the board. For all scenarios, when using the wreckage cards, you use the Food Crates wreckage card. The other wreckage cards are used if you're playing the random wreckage card variant, described on page 27. Just randomly pick any of the wreckage cards. Now there's one little thing that I advise that it's a little bit different than the official setup rules, and that is the wreckage cards. In the official rules, the wreckage cards are first placed in the right side of the threat area. As a result, you skip the event phase during the first round. However, if you simply place the wreckage card on top of the event deck, then you can play the event phase during the first round, and it seems more natural. For the solo setup, you don't modify the Arrange Camp space. If you're playing with 4 players, place the Arrange Camp card on the Arrange Camp space. For the solo setup, you use Friday and the dog, so place their cards and their pawns next to your character sheet. Now you've completed the setup and you're ready to play. The essence of the game is building, gathering, and exploring, but we'll get to that in a minute. The main phases of the game are shown in the upper left portion of the board, and these symbols match the round summary and other symbols on the board, such as the event phase here and the morale phase here. The symbol for the production phase is here because that's where your resources go. The symbol for the action phase that lists all the action phases to the right. And finally, the weather phase here and the night phase here. As we mentioned earlier, the official game rules say that you skip the event phase on the first round, but if you place the wreckage card on top of the event deck, you can start the game by doing the event phase. So you'll flip over the wreckage card and place it on the right side of this first space here. Normal event cards will have some action that you'll want to resolve, but the wreckage cards really don't have an action, so you can just skip that. All you need to do is put the card down here. This space is called the threat space, and we'll talk more about that and event actions later on. The next phase is the morale phase. We start with the token on the 0 spot. In the solo game, you always move the marker up 1 in the beginning of the phase. Then whichever player is the first player will either add or remove the number of determination tokens shown by the number. In the multiplayer game, only the first player collects the determination tokens or loses determination tokens. The first player is designated by this token. If you need to lose determination tokens, but you don't have any, you gain a wound for every determination token that you're supposed to lose, but you don't have. If the marker is on this space, the first player can either gain 2 determination tokens or increase their health by 1. The next phase is the production phase. If the tile where your camp token is has a wood symbol, you gain 1 wood resource, and if it has a fish or a bird on it, you gain 1 food resource. Place any resources you gain in the production phase in the available resources area. Notice that the food that you gain in the production phase is perishable. It's shaped like the banana. The tokens that are shaped like a piece of bread are non-perishable. You don't gain those in the production phase. The next phase is the action phase. It's where most of the things happen in the game by placing workers and resolving actions. There are 7 actions, and they're identified on the bottom of the board and on the round summary card. And as you can see, those actions are the threat action, hunting, building, gathering, exploring, arranging the camp, and resting. Each action in the action phase shows a number of worker symbols to show you how many workers you need to place in order to be successful. The build, gather, and explore actions allow you to decide between using 2 workers that guarantee success or 1 worker that has a little bit of risk. If you place just 1 worker on any of the action spots, you must roll the dice to see whether or not you are successful. Also, you might incur wounds, and you may have to draw an adventure card. In the multiplayer game, all players will place and resolve their pawns during the action phase together, so you can and should work together as a group. Character pawns and Friday can be assigned to any action and can be assigned by themselves or with other pawns. However, the dog and neutral pawns can only be assigned to actions that match their color. For example, the dog can be assigned to exploration or hunt. This also implies that neutral pawns cannot be used for the threat action. Friday, on the other hand, can be assigned to any action. In addition, the neutral pawns cannot be assigned to an action by themselves. They have to have either one of the character pawns or Friday accompany them. If Friday is assigned to an action with a character pawn, Friday must be in the supporting role. When multiple pawns are used to resolve an action, the character on top is considered the resolving character, and the one underneath is considered the supporting character. Only the resolving character suffers any damage or consequence of the actions. Once you've placed all your workers, it's time to resolve their actions. First of all, you need to know that no matter how you've placed your workers, you resolve the actions from left to right. So you will always do the threat action first, the hunt action second, then build, gather, explore, rearrange the camp, and rest. And once you've resolved all the actions, you'll complete the end of action phase. Things are laid out in an order that helps you survive on the island, but they're not necessarily in the order that you would encounter them as you first start playing the game. So we'll teach the game by focusing on things in the order that you would normally encounter them in playing the game, such as, for example, you would typically explore first and don't really fight the beasts until later. So let's start with exploring. For exploration, you can explore any empty space adjacent to an already explored tile. For example, you could not explore in this empty space. For gathering and exploring, I do not have to gather or explore adjacent to the camp. So I could gather in this location or explore in this location, but I have to use more pawns. I have to add 1 pawn for every tile between my camp and my current location. So for example, to explore with guaranteed success in this location, I have to use 4 pawns. Same thing for gathering in this location. Let's now walk through some examples of the explore action. You should pause the video as needed and follow along, and later on you'll get a chance to practice by yourself. We have 4 character pawns here, 2 explorer characters, the dog, and Friday, and we'll use all 4 of them to try to explore. If you haven't already done it, use the wound marker for Friday. The dog can explore and hunt, but we don't have any animals to hunt yet, and the dog can't explore by himself, so Friday will accompany the dog. First, we'll place the dog with Friday on top to explore in this area, and then 1 explorer character here and 1 there. So this area will have an automatic success. In these other 2 areas, we'll have to roll the dice to see if we're successful. Pause the video and place your workers. Now that you've placed your workers, it's time to resolve the explore action. First, let's look at the situation where you're successful. Since Friday and the dog are two workers, you have a guaranteed success here. So you remove the workers, flip over the next tile, and place it on the island. There are several symbols that you will resolve immediately. If you see the beast symbol, you will draw a beast from the top of the beast deck and shuffle it into the existing cards of the hunting deck. You'll also take note of the terrain symbol and place a black marker token on top of any inventions that have that matching terrain symbol. You do not gain any food or wood associated with that terrain. That's only done at the production phase. If you see the discovery token symbol, you'll draw a discovery token for every symbol that you see and place it face up in the future resource area. The meaning of each of the special discovery tokens is defined by the scenario, so look on the scenario card to understand what they do. The treasure discovery cards mean that you draw a treasure mystery card. Until we go over the mystery cards, just discard that and draw another discovery token. The tent symbol means that this area has a natural shelter, and the totem symbol is specific to the scenario. So you need to look at the scenario card to see what the meaning of that totem is. Now it's your turn. You should shuffle up the tiles and give it a try resolving the actions for a successful exploration. Next, let's talk about the situation where you don't have a guaranteed success. If you've only placed one worker, you have to roll the action dice to see the result. The action dice consist of a success die, a wound die, and an adventure die. The V-shaped symbol for victory means that you're successful. If your die shows this symbol, you're unsuccessful, but you gain 2 determination tokens. If Friday rolled the die, he has a special ability which he can discard 2 determination tokens to re-roll one of the die one time, including he can use these determination tokens to re-roll this die one time. If you roll the broken heart symbol, your character or Friday takes 1 wound, and if you roll the question mark, then you must draw 1 card from the adventure deck that you are resolving. There's one exception to that, and that's if you're playing with Friday and he rolls the adventure dice and gets a question mark. He just takes a wound. He does not draw an adventure card. If Friday dies, you don't lose the game, but you can no longer use his pawn to resolve actions. The adventure die, the event card with a question mark, and the adventure token with a question mark all deal with adventure cards. In the first few mini-games, we're going to ignore the adventure cards, even though they're out on the board, just to make things easier to learn the rules. We'll go over the details of the adventure cards later. So let's return to our example and imagine that the explorer has rolled these dice. The 2 determination token symbol means that you're unsuccessful, but you do gain 2 determination tokens. There are no wounds and no adventure cards to draw. So remove the character from the spot and gain your determination tokens. For the last explorer token, let's imagine that they've rolled these dice. You are successful, so you will draw a new island tile, but the explorer takes 1 wound and will have to draw an adventure card. Now, as we've talked about, we are not going to draw adventure cards in this phase. We'll explain that later. Now that you know how to do the Explore action, you should pause the video and play around with it some until you're comfortable with all the actions. Typically, during the first round, you won't do much more than explore, so we're going to skip the other actions for now and go straight to the end of action phase. If we had any resources, we could move them down from the future to the available section. Next, we move down the discovery tokens. Discovery tokens that are for 2 food or 1 wood need to be converted immediately, but the other tokens can be used later. The discovery tokens can be turned in or used at any time. When you trade in a discovery token, it is removed from the game. Next, we apply any effects for inventions and flip the invention card over to the item side and place it on the board with the other invention. Now, bad weather doesn't happen unless you're using the adventure or event card, so we can ignore that for right now. But we are going to do the night phase because bad things happen at night. So now let's talk about the night phase, and the easiest way to do that is just to look at the round summary. Now the first step says that players can move the camp to an adjacent island tile. Now until we go over that, we'll just assume that you're not going to move the camp and we'll ignore that step. The rule book on page 23 and the appendix state that you need to have the character eat and then you decide whether or not to move the camp. On the other hand, the round summary card says that you move the camp first and then you eat. The order doesn't really matter because the available resources go with the camp. However, what is important is step 3 in both of them are dealing with the shelter, and you have to decide to move the camp or not before you deal with the shelter issue. And this is because moving the camp can affect whether or not a shelter is present. The next step is that each player must discard 1 food or they get 2 wounds. In almost all cases, you must remove that food from the available resource section. The exception is that in some cases the player may be sleeping outside of the camp. In that case, you must discard food from the character card itself because you're not in the camp. However, we'll go over that later, so you can ignore it for now. The third step is where we check for the shelter. If you don't have a shelter on your camp, then each player takes 1 wound. And here comes one of the sad parts about the game, and maybe one of the reasons why you don't want to hunt unless you need to. You're going to lose all of your perishable food. The bread shake tokens are non-perishable, so it might be worth building a cellar, because the food production sites create perishable food, not non-perishable. With the exception of the rest phase and specially directed cards, the only time that you can heal is in the night phase. For example, if we had the vegetable token and we had some wounds, we could heal them in the night phase. When a character is healed, you move the marker to the left. If a morale marker is skipped, you do not increase the morale of the party. One of the great things about Robinson Crusoe is that it's really kind of a game system that has all kinds of scenarios. You can even create your own. So for this tutorial, I've created 3 mini scenarios that help you learn the rules. You can access them in PDF form on BoardGameGeek. In the mini games, we'll go through all of the rounds, but we'll just skip a couple of things as we do that. So now it's time to try your first mini game that I call Exploration. In this scenario, you're a scout, so there are no adventure cards. The question mark will have no effect when you roll the adventure die. The totem has no effect on the discovery tokens, and you will skip the event and weather phases. We'll ignore moving the camp and focus only on exploring. If any of the special discovery tokens come up, you'll gain 1 food. And if the treasure discovery tokens come up, you'll redraw them. If you're playing as a solo player, don't forget to use Friday and the dog, and you'll follow the 2-player rules. We'll increase the morale at the start of the morale phase before the effect is resolved. And the goals of this scenario are to explore at least 5 tiles and survive 3 rounds. Of course, you can always use one of the other scenarios to keep track of the rounds as you try the scenario. If you haven't noticed, this video has chapter marks, so as you're playing, you can jump to those sections to remember what we've already talked about. So pause the video and give Exploration a try. Now let's focus on the build action. Build actions can only be attempted once per round and only if the requirements have already been fulfilled. The requirements are typically a terrain type, but they may also be resources. If you've explored a tile that has the appropriate terrain type, then you can place a black marker on there to show that it has been fulfilled. At that point, you can place your pawn in order to attempt to build the invention. When an invention requires a resource, put that resource from the available resource area on top of your pawn so that you can remember that that resource must be used. Some inventions require that other inventions have already been invented, such as the bow requires the rope and the knife, and the pit requires the shovel. When you build the shelter, the roof, and the palisade, you have to use resources in order to build that. And this chart right over here describes how many of wood or fir that you need, and it depends upon the number of players. So the 2 players will require 2 wood or 1 fir. If you're playing the solo variant, you will use the 2-player column. It's a little unfortunate that the chart doesn't span all the way over because this chart does affect all 3 of these things. Now the weapon, on the other hand, requires 1 wood to build. Note that you cannot try to build the roof and the palisade in the same round that you build the shelter. You must already have a shelter, either built or natural, in order to build the roof or the palisade. This also means if you build things like the fire, bricks, wall, or moat, even though you can build them if you don't have a shelter, you don't get the benefit of the palisade increase. When you successfully build the shelter, flip over to your camp token on your island tile to the shelter side. You can also put a black token here just as an easy reminder that the shelter has been built. Also notice that you have to use at least 1 pawn per level. So for example, we could not overload this pawn with lots of wood to build multiple levels. You have to have a pawn per action. Unlike inventions, the weapon, palisade, and roof can be attempted more than once in a round. So for example, in this situation, we have 2 pawns where we will guarantee that we can level up the weapon 1 time, and then Friday will also attempt it, but he'll need to roll the dice to see if he's successful. You'll then move the marker up a level for each successful attempt. If you're successful at building, you return any resources to the supply and put your character back in the character area. You then place your invention card in the future resource area, invention side up. If you are unsuccessful in the build, you return resources to the available resource area so they can be used again. Then you put your character pawn back in the character area. If you like, you can pause the video now and play around with trying to build by using different sets of resources and requirements. Now let's walk through the details of Gather. The Gather action can be used on any tile that has already been explored. You cannot use it on the camp tile because that was already gathered during the production phase. You cannot gather 2 times from the same resource or from a resource that's already been used, but you can gather from separate resources on the same tile. If you were successful in gathering resources, you place the resource in the future resource area. If you like, you can pause the video now and try different arrangements of the tiles to practice gathering from the different tiles, including neutral pawns and trying to gather from far away from the camp. The last 2 actions are Rearrange Camp and Rest. In rearranging the camp, you don't actually rearrange anything, but you do collect 2 determination tokens and increase your morale. For resting, you increase your health by 1 by moving your health marker to the left 1. If you're doing the Rearrange Camp or Rest action, place the pawns above the appropriate action space. For the Rest action, you can do that up to 2 times per character in a round. Now it's time to try the scenario I like to call Baby Steps. It lasts 7 rounds. We have peaceful surroundings, so we won't be using the event phase or the weather phase. Plus, we won't be using the adventure cards. And we have friendly neighbors, so the totem has no effect. The special discovery tokens give us helpers. So for this X one, you get a brown pawn. With this one that has a line in the middle, you get a green pawn. The one with the 2 triangles, a gray pawn. And the one with 2 little dashes, you get a wood. Redraw any treasure tokens. We will exercise the night phase, and if you're playing solo, don't forget to use Friday and the dog, the 2-player rules, and increase the morale at the start of the morale phase. In order to successfully complete the scenario, you have to explore at least 3 tiles, gather from at least 1 tile, explore or gather from a non-adjacent tile, build 1 invention, and build a shelter, roof, and palisade. So pause the video and give that a try. Now let's talk about the event phase. You only draw one card, but here I'm just going to show two of the major ones to explain the difference. One of them has a book icon, the other one has an adventure card icon. Both of them have the same structure, a top part and a bottom part. So you just read what the card says and apply the effects. For the cold rain, we would place an adventure token on top of the Explore Adventure deck and then put a rain cloud in the weather space. The effect of the book icon is shown on the scenario card. The effect of the totem icon and the book item differs from scenario to scenario. After you resolve the adventure icon or the book icon, you need to do the effect underneath it as well. Then we move all threats to the left and bring the card down and place it in the rightmost space. If they get pushed off the edge, this negative effect is enforced. So in this case, for example, if this card gets pushed off the edge, then a rain cloud would be put into the weather space. This card actually needs a pawn and a shovel, so if we hadn't built the shovel already, then it might be too late to build it, so you need to pay attention to what is needed to fulfill the card. Now we're back to the action phase where you do all the work. You may want to consider dealing with one of the threats now, but you also may want to look at your special character abilities and the personal invention. For threats, you place the pawn and any resources that are needed on the card, and it's automatically successful. Each character has special abilities that can be used anytime by spending determination tokens. Special abilities can only be used once per round, so I'll put a black marker on top of it to remind me that that's been used this round. The personal invention can only be built by the character that owns it. It follows the same rules for building as other inventions, except when it is successfully built, you gain 2 determination tokens. Then, instead of placing it in the future resources section, you flip it over to the item side and place it on the board. If it ever gets flipped back, it's placed next to the character board and can be rebuilt again. Don't forget about your starting equipment. It can be used anytime, including in the event phase and before combat when hunting. During the game, effects may require that other tokens be placed on action spaces. These are explained on pages 12 and 13. But very quickly, this token means that you must place an extra pawn. This one means that you must re-roll your dice if it's successful. This token means that you have to have a weapon level of at least 1. And the adventure token means that you must draw an adventure card if you perform this action. Typically, the tokens are removed after the action is taken if they're on an action space. They stay in place if they're on a tile, but this can change based upon the different scenarios, so you need to read the rules and pay attention to the scenario instructions. The blue markers are for special scenario situations. In the scenario, it may show up as a purple color, but it's really just these blue markers. Fighting beasts. You may fight beasts because you decide to go on a hunt. The main value of hunting is that you always gain at least 2 food and sometimes fur. Alternatively, a card may tell you to fight a beast, or you may have to roll the hungry animal die in the weather phase. For the hunt, you place the pawns right on the hunt action space. The hunt is always successful if you have enough pawns, and it can be resolved more than once in the same round as long as there are beasts still left in the area. Be aware, even though it's successful, you may take wounds. We definitely want a strong weapon in order to hunt, so we actually might want to use our starting equipment to boost up our weapon level before we hunt. Starting equipment can be used at any time, and the empty bottle boosts our weapon, not just temporarily, so we can remove the tokens and increase our weapon level. That raises our weapon level to 3. The pistol is able to increase the weapon level, but only temporarily. You do not actually increase the weapon level itself. You just increase the weapon level for that combat only. When fighting a beast, you first compare the strength of the beast to your weapon level. In this case, the boa has a strength of 2 and the weapon has a level of 1. The character will take wounds equal to the beast's level minus the weapon level. So for example, 2 minus 1, the character would take 1 wound. Your character may have some things such as treasures or starting equipment that temporarily boost the weapon level. So these would be good for this one combat. So the old rifle, for example, will give you temporarily +3 for the weapon. So that would be a level of 4, and you would take no wounds. But then you would have to discard the card. Once you've determined the number of wounds to take from combat, then you reduce your weapon by the amount shown here. In this case, it's -2. In our case, we're only able to reduce the weapon by 1, so we take a wound for every level that we can't reduce our weapon. Any temporary boosts in your weapon level are not taken into account here. Next, any resources listed over here, such as food or the skins, are added to the future resource section. Finally, at the bottom of the beast card, there may be further instructions to follow. When a card or a hungry animal die directs you to fight a beast, you only use the beast's strength and compare it to the weapon level, and you don't gain any resources. So effectively, that just means it has a chance to wound you. Because fighting beasts is a little bit complex, you might want to stop the video right now and try it a couple times. Remember that it takes 2 pawns to hunt, but you can resolve it more than one time as long as you've got multiple beast cards. And of course, Friday and the dog can hunt. Try fighting beasts and hunting at different weapon levels to see how it affects your success and your wounds. Don't forget to try your equipment cards, such as the pistol and the empty bottle, that affect your weapon temporarily or permanently. Pause the video and give it a try until you're comfortable fighting beasts. Now we move to the weather phase, which is one of the most dangerous parts of the game. Different effects can be applied throughout the game based upon the different cards that come up, and that can cause snow or rain or storms. On the plus side, there are some tokens that will help you with the weather, such as these large leaves that prevent one rain cloud. Fortunately, the weather is often not a factor during the first part of the game. If you look at your scenario card, you'll see when the weather dice are to be rolled, and it will tell you which types of die are to be rolled. The weather phase section on the round summary explains in detail what happens with the weather and how it affects you. The hungry animal die has the following characteristics. This symbol discards 1 food. This one decreases the palisade by 1 level, and this one means that you have to combat an animal of level 3. During the first round, you typically will not roll any weather dice, but it's possible, though not likely, that you'll have some weather tokens show up on the weather section. So let's walk through this very difficult example here. First, for each snow cloud, we have to discard 1 wood. So we remove 1 wood from the available resource section if we have any. If we don't have any, the character takes a wound. We then add up the rain and snow and compare it to our roof level. In this case, we have 2 for snow and rain, and our roof level is 0. For each missing level of the roof, we lose 1 food and 1 wood. So that means we're supposed to lose 2 food and 2 wood, but we only have 1 food in the available resources. So similar to the snow, we will gain 1 wound for each resource that we can't fulfill. So that means we will lose this food and gain 3 wounds. Unfulfilled demands are explained in detail in the additional rules on page 24 of the rulebook. The last token we have to resolve is the storm. The storm results in strong winds, so we have to decrease our palisade by 1. But again, we can't do it, so we gain a wound. Perhaps now you see the importance of upgrading your camp, and in fact, later on in the game, you might have to roll the hungry animal die, which would be affected by your weapon. Here's a little idea that might help you remember the effects of snow, rain, and storms on your camp. Think of the snow as you need to heat, and so that's why you lose a wood. Rain, think of it as your cooked food is spoiled, so that's why you lose wood and food. And for the storm, think of it as blowing down your fence, so that's why you lose a level on the palisade. Since the weather phase is a complex phase, you might want to pause the video now and try it out a couple of times to get used to the mechanics. Try different combinations of dice and tokens. Compare to different levels of roof and palisades, and also weapons because you might fight hungry beasts. Pause the video and give that a try now. Until we build the shelter, roof, and palisade, we will suffer consequences in the night phase and possibly in the weather phase as well. However, there's a balance to consider because in the game of Robinson Crusoe, you may want to balance moving your camp versus building it up. Because you're trying to explore the island, it's usually a good idea to try to move your camp during the night phase of the first few rounds. You'll suffer a little bit for not having a shelter, but you'll put yourself in a better position within the board. Later on in other rounds, it'll get more expensive if you've already built your shelter, roof, or palisade. The key point to be aware of is that the decision to move your camp must be done before you account for the shelter. Once you have built a shelter, it doesn't get unbuilt, so you can move it to another tile. Now let's see what happens if you want to move your camp after you've built up the roof and the palisade. If you leave a natural shelter, that is, you haven't yet built your own shelter, you will lose all of your roof level and palisade level. So imagine your palisade level was 2 and your roof level was 3. They would both be reduced to 0. If your roof and palisade are built upon a shelter that you have built and you decide to move your camp, the levels will be reduced by half, rounded up, but you'll still get to keep them. If, for example, you had a palisade level of 1 and a roof level of 3, the palisade level actually wouldn't get reduced because 1/2 rounded up is still 1, but the roof level would go down to 2. 3 divided by 2, rounded up. If you have a shortcut and you move your camp, the shortcut token is removed and the shortcut is returned to the invention side. You can rebuild the shortcut later. There's one other rule about moving your camp that's not likely to happen. It involves the +1 wood and +1 food. Now, if these were created by the hatchet or an item, they actually move with your camp. However, if you move to a tile that already has a +1 production, that +1 at the tile that you're going to takes precedence. And that means that the token that's moving and the associated or attached card is discarded. So in this particular case, the hatchet created the +1 wood, but there's already a +1 wood on the tile we're moving to, so we lose the token and the card. There isn't already a +1 food, and so when the snare moves, it moves with you, as does the +1 food and your camp token. Moving camp is another complex mechanism, so it's a good idea to give that a try. You can only move your camp from an explored tile to another adjacent explored tile. Try moving from a camp without a shelter, a camp with a shelter, or a camp with a natural shelter. Try moving with different roof and palisade levels so you can practice how that affects when you move the camp. You should practice moving the camp when you have a shortcut, a snare, or hatchet card, or when you have these tokens that have +1 wood or +1 food, moving from and to those different tiles. You should pause the video and give it a try now. The mystery deck contains beast cards, treasure cards, and trap cards. The way you resolve them is to draw until you get the symbol of interest. So for example, to resolve this situation where we have a beast and a treasure, we draw cards off the top until we see a beast or treasure. In this case, since we found the beast, we resolve that card. Next, we draw until we find a treasure. Now you're ready for the survival training scenario. This scenario includes all of the rules of the game. The only difference is that you're not going to be using the adventure cards because they provide dangers. The dangers are not hard to understand, they just make it more difficult to complete your task. So we'll just focus on the positive things that you're trying to accomplish and hindered only by the event cards. The scenario lasts 7 rounds, and notice on rounds 3 and 4 we experience rain. On rounds 5 and 6 we experience snow, and on round 7 we experience rain and snow. You're still a tenderfoot, so we won't be using the adventure cards, and the question mark on the adventure die has no effect. Since we're playing with the event cards but not the adventure cards, just ignore the question mark symbol when it comes up. The event cards still cause some trouble. They just don't cause extra trouble by adding more adventures. The totem this time does give you a green pawn so that you can explore. The special discovery tokens give you a gray pawn to help with gathering, and you redraw any treasure tokens. The book icon gives you a brown pawn to help with building. By now, the solo players ought to be very familiar with the rules needed for solo. And in getting started, we will start with the biscuits, hammers and nails, and for the wreckage card, we'll use the wrecked lifeboat. We will be using all of the phases. Now, the goals of the scenario is to build a shelter, roof, and palisade, fight one beast, move the camp after you've built a shelter and roof and palisade, and then rebuild the camp. Build 2 inventions, experience 1 bad weather, and use a character ability at least 1 time. So pause the video and give that a try. Now that you know how to survive, it's time to introduce the adventure cards. These don't change the basic mechanics of the game, but they just make it more difficult and interesting. Whenever an adventure card is drawn, you will resolve the effect shown on the card. Most adventure cards actually have 2 parts, a top portion and a bottom portion. The top portion is resolved immediately, and often it has some decision that you can make. And depending upon the decision that you make, this card may get shuffled into the event deck to resolve the bottom portion later when it comes up in the event deck. Some cards, such as Nasty Wound, result in special wounds on the character. You place the wound marker on a specific spot on the character, such as in this case on the character's arm. That wound is not removed by any normal healing, but is only resolved when the card shows up again when you draw from the event deck. Some cards, such as Old Hut, require you to go through the mystery deck, such as in this case you actually draw 2 cards to resolve a beast and a treasure. There are 2 main ways that you can be required to draw an adventure card. The first one is if you roll the adventure dice and the question mark symbol comes up. The other way that you can be required to draw an adventure card is if the adventure token is on the deck representing the action that you want to do. Tokens are placed on the adventure cards by events in the game, such as the event cards here that show these different question marks. When you encounter an adventure icon, put that token on top of the deck, unless the token is already there. So if there's a token on the adventure deck of the action that I want to do, I have to draw the adventure card, even if I have enough tokens to make this a guaranteed success. So in that case, I don't really have to roll the adventure dice because I'm going to have to draw the card. But even if I do roll it and it comes up as a question mark, I don't draw 2 cards. I just draw that 1 card. After I've drawn that card and resolved its effect, I discard the adventure token. Some cards describe the concept of spending the night phase outside of the camp. So let's explain what that is. Remember, actions are resolved in order, so let's first assume that you have built an invention and gathered some food and wood in previous actions. Now, during your exploration phase, you're successful, but you also have to draw an adventure card. Let's draw the adventure card first, and we'll show you why in a second. That card says that you need to execute the night phase outside of camp. What this means is that any mystery cards, discovery tokens, or resources that you've gained during this particular action will go directly to your character sheet and not to the future resources section. So let's assume that the tile that we have discovered has the 3 discovery tokens. Those discovery tokens are placed on your character sheet and are only available to you. The items that were already in the future resource section are still there. And the beast card is placed in the hunt space as normal. So you may notice that spending the night outside of the camp will have a bigger impact on multiplayer games. Players spending the night outside of camp are not affected by weather. Now, if there is no natural shelter on the tile where you're spending the night, you do take a wound. And here's probably the biggest thing. You probably won't have any food, and if you don't have any food, you will take 2 wounds. However, it's not all bad because many of the events that cause you to spend the night outside of the camp give you some benefit. And all of the resources that are on your character card at the beginning of the next round go to the available resource section. Spending the night outside of camp is not too complex, but it doesn't happen that often, so it's easy to forget. So you may want to pause the video and give it a try a couple of times. And also, you might want to know that it's described on page 21 of the rulebook. Now you know all the rules for playing Robinson Crusoe. The next thing to do is just to try the different scenarios that come in the game. There are even a number of fan-made scenarios that are fun. Now, Robinson Crusoe is a very challenging game, and for beginners, especially when you're just trying to focus on learning the mechanics, it can be a bit overwhelming. You might even say stressful. I mean, it's a survival game after all. So if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, here's some things that you can do. Well, first of all, you can play without the adventure cards like we did on our scenarios, just to learn the mechanics and get used to the scenario. You can consider that a kind of story mode. Another thing that you can do is you can check out page 27 in the rule book, and they tell you some ideas to make the game easier or even harder. 2 of the suggestions that they give you to make the game easier to play is to use the dog and Friday. But if you're playing as a solo character, then you're already using the dog and Friday. So you can just add some extra character pawns in order to make it easier. And of course, if you have any questions, don't forget the round summary and the rule book, which is full of information. I hope you enjoy playing Robinson Crusoe: Adventures on the Cursed Island.